I still remember the sound, that deep, hollow metallic groan right before the engines gave out. It wasn't sudden. It felt like the aircraft itself was exhaling, like it already knew what was about to happen. The storm came fast over the Cascades that night, swallowing the sky whole. One moment the horizon was clear, the next it was nothing but white noise and chaos. The snow hit like sandpaper, scratching across the windshield, and the altimeter needle spun uselessly. I called for clearance twice, but all I got back was static, long, dragging, distorted static that sounded almost like breathing. The panel lights flickered. The compass twitched north, then west, then dead. It was supposed to be routine, a courier run from Spokane to Astoria. Low altitude, 2-hour flight, no passengers. Just me, the radio, and the hum of the engine. But routine doesn't exist when the air temperature drops 15 degrees in less than a minute, and your instruments start freezing from the inside out. I remember tapping the altimeter, thinking maybe it was stuck, but the numbers kept spinning, faster now, as if gravity itself had tilted sideways. The horizon disappeared behind the storm curtain, and the clouds pressed so low they felt solid. For a second, I thought I saw something. Lights, maybe reflections from the ground. But then the engines coughed once, twice, and went completely silent. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel natural. Pilots know it. It's the silence where sound still exists, you just can't hear it. The propellers stopped, the plane dropped into a glide, and for a few surreal seconds it felt peaceful, like I was floating. Then the forest rose up to meet me. A flash of light tore across the tree line, blinding white, and the next moment everything became motion and impact, metal screeching, glass shattering, the weight of the seatbelt crushing into my ribs, and then nothing. Just darkness and that strange metallic taste in my mouth, like ozone after lightning. They told me later that my signal vanished from radar at 2142. No emergency beacon, no coordinates, no wreckage. According to them, I was gone, declared lost somewhere over the mountain range. But I wasn't gone. I woke up hours later, half buried in snow, the wreckage scattered around me in twisted pieces. My right leg burned with a sharp, deep pain, and when I tried to move, it felt like the ground itself pushed back. Everything was too still, no wind, no sound, no life, just a heavy, suffocating quiet. I tried the radio first, the emergency channel, the one you use when you're completely alone, static. Then a low hum, like the faint echo of my own heartbeat. I thought maybe it was feedback, so I turned the dial, but the sound didn't fade. It shifted, moved. For a moment it almost sounded like a voice, distant and layered beneath the interference. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was wrong. It wasn't panic, wasn't human. It was deliberate, calm, like something whispering instructions. I should have been terrified, but shock does strange things. I pulled myself out of the snow and dragged what was left of the survival kit toward the tree line. The forest loomed dark and endless, the pines twisting like they'd been frozen mid-motion. My flashlight beam barely pierced the fog, and every breath came out as a cloud of steam that hung too long in the air before fading. I built a small fire under a rock ledge, the way they teach you in training, and tried to convince myself I'd make it till morning. But even then, even half-conscious and freezing, I knew something wasn't right. The air felt occupied, not alive, not hostile, just aware. Like the forest itself was waiting for me to move. I held the radio close, pressing the transmit button every few minutes just to hear the static, just to know I wasn't already gone. At some point, the signal shifted again, cutting through the white noise. A crack, a pause, and then a voice, clear enough to make my blood run cold. It said, "Stay where you are?" I remember the firelight flickering across the snow and the way that single phrase lingered long after the signal died. It wasn't a rescue order. It wasn't command radio. It sounded personal, like someone standing just beyond the light, whispering through the storm. That was the last thing I heard before everything went dark again. When I woke up the second time, I wasn't on the forest floor anymore. The fire was gone. The air smelled different, damp, earthy, warm. And when I looked up, I realized the ceiling above me wasn't sky. It was stone. When I came to, the world felt hollow, quiet in a way that didn't belong to nature. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until it starts to sound like a hum. No wind, no birds, not even the faint crack of branches in the cold. Just the slow, rhythmic drip of melting snow from the trees, each drop echoing louder than it should have. I was lying at the edge of a ravine, half covered in frost, the remnants of my flight suit stiff with ice. The plane was gone, or maybe I was too far from it. All I could see through the fog were fragments of metal scattered in the snow, each one reflecting a dull gray light from nowhere. Pain came next, sudden and sharp, shooting up from my right leg. Something had gone clean through the fabric, a metal shard, maybe part of the fuselage. The blood had already started to freeze around it. I pulled the survival kit closer, hands shaking so hard I could barely unzip it, and wrapped the wound the best I could. The cold wasn't just cold, it was heavy, pressing into my chest with every breath. The air itself felt wrong, thick and metallic, like I was breathing through wet cloth. I reached for the radio, hoping the emergency frequency might still pick up a trace of signal. When I powered it on, the sound hit me. That coarse, broken static that feels alive somehow, shifting and crawling through the channel. I called in my coordinates even though I didn't know where I was. My voice sounded strange, hollowed out by the interference. Then, buried deep beneath the static, I heard something, a tone, a flicker of rhythm that almost sounded like words. I pressed the receiver closer, and for a split second, I thought I heard my own voice repeating back to me. Faint, delayed, distorted. I killed the transmission immediately. The noise stopped, but the air didn't go quiet again. The silence that followed was different, not empty but watching. Every instinct in my body screamed to move, to get out of the open. The tree line ahead was thick, almost impenetrable, but anything was better than lying exposed. I tried to stand. The pain shot through my leg again, white hot, forcing me to crawl instead. The snow was dense and wet, sticking to my gloves and blurring the edges of everything. By the time I reached the first row of pines, the light had already started to fade. The fog was thick enough that even my flashlight beam died after a few meters, swallowed whole by the gray. The smell changed as I moved deeper in, from burning fuel and metal to damp soil and rot. I stopped to catch my breath, listening for anything familiar. Still nothing, not even the sound of my own echo. It was as if the forest didn't reflect sound at all, it just absorbed it. I found a small clearing sheltered by fallen branches and tried to set up a signal flare. The fuse hissed weakly, but refused to light. My gloves were soaked through, my fingers stiff. I needed heat, so I built a small fire out of bark and scraps from the emergency kit. The flame flickered, sputtered, and finally caught. For the first time since the crash, I felt something close to warmth. But even that didn't feel right. The firelight didn't travel far. It just hovered in the mist, like it was trapped inside a sphere. Beyond it, the forest stayed perfectly still. That's when I noticed the shadows. At first, I thought they were just tricks of light, branches swaying in the fog, smoke bending around the trees. But the more I stared, the more I realized they were moving against the wind. Slow, deliberate, tall. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I reached for the radio again, desperate for any signal, and turned the dial all the way through the spectrum. For a few seconds, nothing but static. Then, faintly, a sound. A low, drawn-out breath. It came through once, then again, closer this time. The frequency meter flickered violently, as if reacting to movement nearby. I froze, staring into the dark, where the mist seemed to pulse in rhythm with the sound. And then it stopped. The static fell silent, the air went still, and for the first time I realized how far from the world I really was. The forest didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like something breathing, something aware, and I was inside it. By nightfall, the cold had turned from sharp to merciless, the kind that seeps through fabric and bone until even your heartbeat feels slower. I had found shelter beneath a rock shelf where the wind couldn't reach me, a shallow hollow lined with damp moss and scattered pine needles. My fire was small, weak, more a pulse of orange than a flame. The snow outside hissed when it hit the embers, releasing thin wisps of steam that curled like ghosts in the dark. I kept the radio close, running it on the emergency frequency. It was the only sound left in that silence, that endless, swallowing silence. Static has its own rhythm if you listen long enough. The pops and hisses start to sound like breath, like something alive just on the other side of the signal. For a while, it was almost comforting. Then I noticed the pattern. The noise wasn't random anymore. It rose and fell in a steady rhythm, like inhaling and exhaling. I leaned closer, thinking it was interference from my own mic, but then I heard it, a voice, faint, buried deep beneath the static, stretched thin like it was coming from underwater. Not a full sentence at first, just fragments, a tone, a vibration, something that wasn't human speech but was trying to be. I adjusted the dial, fingers trembling, and suddenly it sharpened. A single phrase, clear enough that it felt like someone had whispered it right beside my ear. "Stay where you are." Every instinct in me froze. I turned the volume down slowly, staring into the radio's dim green light. My first thought was that someone had picked up my signal. Rescue, maybe a search team with poor transmission. But the voice didn't have that clipped professional tone. It was softer, too calm. It didn't sound like an instruction. It sounded like a warning. I scanned the darkness outside the firelight, but the fog swallowed everything. The tree line looked closer than before, as if the forest itself had crept inward while I wasn't watching. My breath came out in quick white bursts. Then, somewhere in the mist, I heard it. A low, steady hum, deep enough to make the ground beneath me vibrate. Not thunder, not wind, movement. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The beam caught nothing but dense fog and falling snow, a curtain of gray that shimmered like smoke. But I could feel it, something large shifting just beyond the reach of the light, circling the fire in wide, careful arcs. I told myself it was a bear, maybe a moose. The forests up here were full of them, but then it stopped. The sound didn't fade away. It just stopped. No footsteps, no rustle of branches, nothing. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I could feel eyes on me, not anger, not hunger, just presence, watching, measuring, the kind of stillness that presses against the back of your neck until your skin crawls. I stayed frozen, hand gripping the flare gun, waiting for movement. Minutes passed, then hours. The fire burned low, the cold crept closer, and still nothing came out of the dark. At some point I must have blinked too long, because when I looked again, the shape was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. Only the radio still hissed faintly beside me, the same pattern of static looping over and over like breathing in reverse. I turned it off, but even then, the sound didn't leave my head. It followed me into the silence, like an echo that wasn't waiting to fade. Around midnight, the mist thickened until the forest seemed to dissolve into it. The fire was dying, just faint red coals breathing against the cold, when I saw it for the first time. A glow, faint and golden, moving between the trees. It wasn't the sharp beam of a flashlight or the white burst of a flare. It was soft, rhythmic, almost alive. It pulsed gently, like the slow beating of a heart behind the fog. I thought maybe it was a search team. Maybe someone had found the wreckage and was combing through the woods. I tried to stand, but my leg collapsed beneath me, the wound splitting open again. The pain hit like lightning, blinding and absolute. I must have blacked out for a second, because when I opened my eyes, I wasn't where I'd fallen. The fire was behind me now, dim and distant, just a flicker through the mist. I was lying flat on the snow, my body half sunk into the frost. The glow was closer, spreading across the ground like liquid light. I couldn't tell if it was moving toward me or if I was being drawn to it. My first instinct was to crawl away, but my arms felt heavy, like gravity itself had changed direction. Shapes began to form inside the glow, tall, slender outlines stepping out from the haze. Not animals, too deliberate, too coordinated. There were 3, maybe 4 of them, moving in silence, their steps leaving no sound, no tracks. They were human in form but broader across the shoulders, their movements slow and unhurried, as if the cold meant nothing to them. For a moment I thought I was hallucinating, that the crash, the shock, the loss of blood had finally caught up to me. But then one of them came close enough for the firelight to catch its face. The skin, if that's what it was, looked rough, textured like bark or moss, the color shifting between brown and gray as it moved. The hair, thick and matted, glistened faintly with moisture. But it wasn't that which froze me. It was the eyes. They weren't wild, weren't predatory. They were steady, dark, and filled with something I didn't expect, exhaustion. Like whatever it was had lived too long, seen too much, and was simply tired, ancient even. It leaned over me, the light wrapping around its silhouette, until all I could see was the faint glimmer of its gaze. My body locked, waiting for impact, for a blow, a sound, anything. Instead, it placed a hand, large, coarse, heavy, against my chest. The touch wasn't cold. It was warm, almost hot, radiating through the layers of my flight suit. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The pressure built, pulsing in time with that golden glow, and then the pain in my leg began to dissolve. The throbbing dulled, the shaking stopped, and the only thing I could feel was the warmth spreading outward, through my ribs, through my lungs, until my vision blurred again. Somewhere in that haze, I heard a low hum, deep, harmonic, almost musical. It vibrated through the ground, through my bones, through the air itself. The light brightened once, flooding everything in gold, and then dimmed. When I opened my eyes again, the shapes were still there, but fading, dissolving back into the mist, their edges melting into the darkness. I tried to speak, to thank them, or beg for help, I don't know which, but no sound came out. Only the faint echo of their hum remained, beating softly in the distance, until even that was gone. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the snow around me, no longer white but faintly glowing, as though the ground itself had absorbed their light. When I woke again, the world had changed. The cold was gone. The wind, the trees, the endless white, all of it replaced by the muffled stillness of stone. The air was damp, thick with the smell of wet earth and something sweet and unfamiliar, like crushed herbs. My head pounded, heavy with confusion, and when I tried to sit up, my hands brushed against the uneven texture of rock, carved smooth by something deliberate. A faint orange light flickered across the walls, casting long, dancing shadows that made the space feel alive. It took a moment to realize the light wasn't from firewood. There were torches, old but steady, wedged into carved hollows along the stone. Their smoke drifted upward into unseen vents in the ceiling, disappearing into the dark. The flicker revealed more than just rough walls. The surfaces were covered in markings carved deep and precise, spirals, interlocking lines, symbols that seemed to shift each time I looked at them. They weren't random. They carried rhythm, order, maybe even meaning, though not in any language I knew. The longer I stared, the more they began to feel intentional, as if they weren't just drawn on the rock, but from it. My clothes were gone. In their place was a rough fabric woven from coarse fibers that scratched against my skin. It smelled faintly of smoke and soil. I looked down and saw that my leg, the one that had been torn open, was clean, the wound covered in layers of dried leaves and tightly wound fibers. Someone had treated it, maybe even healed it. I tried to stand, but my body felt heavy. Not from pain, but from something else. Like gravity itself was different here. That's when I heard it, a sound so low it barely registered as hearing. A vibration pulsing through the stone floor, traveling upward through my hands, my chest, my teeth. It wasn't noise, it was resonance. The same hum I'd heard in the forest, only deeper now, slower, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Every few minutes it returned, a deep, soft tremor that passed through the walls and faded into the dark. Each time it came, the torches flickered, as if breathing in time with it. I wasn't alone. I couldn't see them yet, but the air had that same charged stillness, the quiet tension that comes from being watched. Shadows moved faintly at the edges of the light. The sound of water dripping somewhere far away echoed in rhythm with the hum. I scanned the walls again, hoping to find an exit, but there was none, just more carvings, more spirals, all leading inward, converging at one point near the far side of the chamber where the rock seemed to glow faintly from within. I crawled closer, drawn to that dim light, and saw that it wasn't stone at all. It was something embedded in it, a smooth, translucent surface that pulsed faintly with each tremor of sound. The glow was soft, golden, alive. When I reached out to touch it, the air around it warmed instantly, radiating through my fingers and into my arm. For a brief second, I felt the same sensation as before, the warmth spreading through my chest, the strange calm pushing the fear aside, and beneath it, faint but undeniable, a presence. Something in that cave was breathing, not air, not life as we know it. It was the mountain itself, awake and aware. The hum grew deeper, the walls vibrating like the inside of a chest, inhaling. My vision blurred slightly, and I had the overwhelming sense that I wasn't supposed to be here, that I'd crossed into something older than the world I understood. Then the hum stopped. The air held its breath. And in that sudden stillness, I felt movement, soft, deliberate footsteps behind me, echoing through the cave, too heavy to belong to anything human. I saw them clearly for the first time when the torches flared brighter, their flames bending slightly toward the movement that entered the chamber. There were at least 3 of them stepping from the deeper shadows as if the darkness itself had let them go. They were tall, impossibly tall, their frames built like men but broader across the shoulders, their arms longer, the muscles beneath their skin moving with slow, deliberate precision. Their faces were partly hidden by what looked like coarse hair or moss that clung to their bodies in uneven layers, glistening faintly in the orange light. The glow of the torches revealed eyes that reflected light, not like an animal's, but like polished amber, alive and aware. For a moment, I couldn't tell whether they were watching me or studying the air around me, as if every sound, every breath, carried meaning they could read. They moved with absolute control, not a wasted gesture among them. When one turned its head toward another, the motion was silent but not empty. It felt as though the air between them shifted. I realized quickly that what passed for their language wasn't sound, it was vibration. The same low hum I'd heard in the forest now passed between them, not through speech, but through the very space they occupied. The frequency rippled across the stone walls, faint enough to make the carvings tremble. The symbols nearest the torchlight seemed to respond, glowing for a heartbeat before fading again as if the cave itself was listening. I tried to move, but every muscle in my body resisted, not from fear but from something else. A weight in the air, thick and pressing, holding me still. One of them stepped closer, crouching beside me. It carried a small bowl made of bark and stone resin, filled with a damp greenish mixture that smelled of pine and soil. Without hesitation, it reached toward my leg and pressed the substance against the wound. The texture was cool and sticky, and where it touched my skin, the pain vanished instantly. I could feel warmth spreading outward, dulling every nerve until my body went light, detached, almost peaceful. When I looked down, the bleeding had stopped completely. The crude bandage of leaves I'd seen earlier was gone, replaced by new layers of the same plant matter. Only now they were fused together, almost part of the skin. I opened my mouth to speak, the words catching in my throat. "Where am I?" asked, the sound barely more than a whisper. The three figures turned their heads toward me at the same time, the motion smooth, synchronized, deliberate. For a moment I thought they might answer. Instead, they only stood there, watching. Their eyes flickered faintly in the torchlight, not cold, not hostile, simply unreadable. One of them, the smallest of the three, stepped forward. Its features were less sharp, its gaze softer, almost curious. It extended a hand, slow and steady, until its palm rested on my shoulder. The touch was heavy, but not rough. A warmth spread from that contact, climbing up through my neck and into my chest, calming my breathing and slowing my pulse. It didn't speak, but I could feel the message in that stillness, clear and undeniable. Be still. They didn't leave right away. For several minutes they remained in the chamber, communicating in their silent resonance, the low vibrations moving through the air like underwater currents. I began to notice that with every pulse, the walls of the cave seemed to answer, the hum traveling outward through the stone and back again, creating a rhythm that felt ancient, deliberate, a conversation I wasn't part of but somehow existed within. When they finally turned to leave, the glow from the torches dimmed slightly, as if drawn to their movement. The last one to go, the smaller one, lingered a moment longer, its gaze fixed on me. Then, with a faint echo of that deep vibration, they disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the quiet hum of the cave and the fading warmth on my skin. Time stopped meaning anything in that place. There was no sun, no moon, no rhythm of light or shadow to separate one moment from the next. The glow from the cave walls never changed. It stayed constant, a steady pulse that kept everything suspended between waking and dreaming. I tried to count the days at first, marking them on the stone with a shard of rock, but I gave up after the 10th line, or maybe it was the 20th. It didn't matter anymore. The longer I stayed, the more my body adjusted to the strange equilibrium of that underground world. I didn't feel hunger the same way. Thirst faded faster. The cold that once bit into my bones now only brushed against me, as if the air itself had rewritten my instincts. They came and went without pattern, the tall ones, moving silently between chambers beyond the torchlight. Sometimes they brought me food, small bowls of something greenish and bitter, tasting faintly of pine and salt. Other times, clear water that smelled like the inside of a storm. I couldn't tell if it was to keep me alive or simply to observe how long I could last. My strength returned slowly, but the sense of control didn't. My body was mine, but my thoughts began to stretch thin, bending under something unseen. I'd catch myself listening to the hum for hours, the low vibration that pulsed through the ground like the heartbeat of something vast. Every time it passed, my chest would tighten, my mind would drift, and when it faded, I'd realize minutes, or maybe hours, had slipped away. At some point, I began hearing voices. Soft at first, just beneath the sound of dripping water. I thought it was echo, a trick of acoustics. But then I recognized it. My name, spoken not aloud, but inside, like the thought had entered my head without permission. I spun around once, half expecting to see one of them standing behind me, but the chamber was empty. Still, the word lingered, repeating faintly, until it didn't sound like one voice anymore, but several, whispering, layered, each carrying a different tone, a different weight. They weren't the creatures. The sound came from the stone itself, from the mountain, as if it remembered me, or was trying to remind me of something I'd already forgotten. When the voices stopped, I was left with a hollow silence that felt worse than any sound. My mind started slipping into strange loops. I'd wake up unsure whether I'd slept or simply stopped existing for a while. My watch had long since died, but even if it hadn't, I doubt it could have measured whatever time was in that place. The cave didn't obey it. It made its own rules. Days and nights were just ideas there, fragile ones, crumbling under the hum that kept everything alive. Then came the sound I'd almost forgotten, the faint electronic pulse of my radio. I found it resting near the cave entrance, sitting neatly on a flat rock, clean, polished, the screen glowing faintly as if it had never been broken. My hands shook as I picked it up, the familiar weight almost enough to make me believe I'd imagined everything else. I pressed the transmitter and called out my old frequency, my voice cracking from disuse. "This is Pilot 219 declaring emergency. I'm alive." "Repeat, I'm alive." For a few seconds there was nothing, just static. Then, cutting through it, came a sound. Sharp, deliberate, the unmistakable click of another signal locking in, and then a voice, calm, mechanical. "We have your signal. Stay where you are." Relief flooded me so fast I almost laughed. I shouted into the mic, telling them my name, my call sign, where I'd crashed, that I needed extraction immediately. The echo bounced off the stone walls, making my words sound smaller, weaker. Then came the reply. The same voice, only now distorted, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. "You're not authorized to leave?" I froze, staring at the receiver. The message repeated, lower this time, the pitch dropping until the words barely sounded human. "You're not authorized to leave." The light on the radio flickered, pulsing in sync with the deep hum beneath the ground. For a moment, I thought I could hear something breathing behind the static. Slow, steady, too close. Then the signal cut off. The cave went silent again. The radio slipped from my hands, the sound of it hitting the stone swallowed by the air. I sat there for a long time, staring at the device, the faint glow of its screen fading until it matched the walls. It wasn't broken. It wasn't malfunctioning. It had delivered a message exactly as it was meant to. And as I listened to the next wave of that deep vibration roll through the chamber, shaking the floor, I realized something I hadn't dared to before. The transmission hadn't come to me. It had come from here. I turned toward the entrance, where the faint golden light from the outer chamber bled into the cave. They were there, all three of them, standing perfectly still, their outlines framed by the shimmer of mist that hung in the air. I hadn't noticed them enter, but somehow they had been there the whole time, as if they'd known what was coming through the radio before I did. None of them moved at first. They just watched, their heads slightly tilted, their amber eyes catching the glow of the torches. It wasn't anger in their gaze. It wasn't curiosity either. It was recognition, as though they had understood every word that had come through the static. One of them stepped forward, the smaller one, the one that had touched my shoulder days before, or weeks. I couldn't tell anymore. In its hand, it carried something small, charred, the metal edges bent and blackened. I didn't understand what I was looking at until the creature extended its arm and placed it gently on the stone before me. My badge, my flight identification tag. The one I'd worn clipped to my jacket the night of the crash. The surface was scorched, the letters barely legible, but it was mine. They had found the plane. I felt the weight of it hit harder than I expected. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the faint scent of burned plastic and fuel still clinging to it. That meant the wreckage wasn't far. They had been there, in the forest, in the snow, long before I woke up. I thought then about the way they'd moved through the trees, how no branch had cracked under their steps, how no prints had been left in the snow. They hadn't just found me, they had chosen to. They had carried me here, kept me alive, patched my wounds, and waited. But not for me to recover, for me to understand. It all fell into place with a kind of slow, dreadful clarity. They hadn't held me captive, and they hadn't tried to communicate in the way humans do. I wasn't their prisoner, I was their observation. Something caught between their world and mine, not a subject of mercy, but of study. Their silence wasn't ignorance, it was control. They could have let me die in that wreckage, but instead they watched, recorded, learned. Every attempt I made to reach the surface had been met with interference, with distortion. They weren't keeping me underground by force. They were keeping me there by purpose. The smaller one tilted its head slightly, the faint hum in the air rising again, low and rhythmic, like the sound of air moving through the chest of a sleeping giant. I understood then that I wasn't meant to leave, not because they feared me, but because I was part of something still unfolding. I had become the link between two worlds that had never meant to meet. Whatever they were, they didn't want me gone. And somewhere in the deepest part of me, I began to realize that maybe I couldn't leave, even if I tried. The last recording on my flight transmitter lasted exactly 23 seconds. They recovered it months later, though most of it was corrupted beyond recognition. But the part that survived still plays clearly, the kind of clarity that makes your stomach tighten when you hear it. My voice, raw, exhausted, breaking in places, saying, "This is Pilot 219. I'm alive. I'm in some kind of cavern. They're here. They don't want me to leave." There's a pause after that, maybe 2 seconds long, where nothing but silence fills the channel. Then the hum starts, low at first, then rising, deep enough to make the playback equipment rattle. For years, analysts called it wind interference, an acoustic illusion caused by pressure shifts underground. But eventually, someone compared it to recorded seismic data, and the truth became harder to explain away. It wasn't wind. It wasn't movement of air at all. It was a frequency, an infrasonic resonance measuring below 15 hertz, too low for the human ear to process as sound, yet strong enough to vibrate solid rock. The kind of frequency that doesn't occur in nature, at least not without something or someone creating it. The hum continued for 11 seconds, each pulse slower than the one before, fading gradually until it disappeared into nothing. Then, silence. No static, no click of disconnection, just the sound of the world holding its breath. That was the last trace of me anyone ever heard. The wreckage of the plane was never found, and according to official records, I never made that flight. But sometimes, when storms roll through the Cascades, radio operators still report hearing a faint signal on an unused frequency. A single voice caught between the noise and the hum, whispering, "Stay where you are." They said it was 3 days later when they found me, though it felt like years had passed in the dark. A rescue team spotted me lying near the edge of a frozen stream, half a mile from the last recorded coordinates of the flight. I remember the sound of rotors cutting through the air, the blinding light from the helicopter sweeping across the snow. The world above felt wrong, too loud, too sharp, too alive. They said I was conscious when they reached me, but I have no memory of it. The first thing I truly remember is waking up in a hospital bed under fluorescent lights that felt colder than the cave ever had. They told me I was lucky. No burns, no broken bones, no internal damage, just mild hypothermia and dehydration. The doctors were more interested in how I'd survived than in what I'd seen. When I told them about the cave, about the carvings, the light, the figures, they exchanged looks I knew too well from my years in service. The look people give when they've already decided what's real for you. I tried to explain, to describe what I'd felt, the hum that moved through the walls like breath, but they stopped taking notes halfway through. One of them, a younger man with the kind of practiced patience that belongs to bureaucrats, said softly, "There are no caves in that area, not for miles." I asked to see maps, satellite images, geological records, anything that could prove what I'd found. They brought them the next day, printed on glossy paper, labeled in military grid coordinates. The area they said I'd been recovered from was solid granite, the kind of rock that doesn't form caves naturally. No hollow spaces, no tunnels, nothing. I pointed to the section where the entrance should have been, where the mist had curled and the forest had thinned, but the official satellite image showed nothing, just dark green forest and stone. The rescuer who brought me back swore they'd combed the valley, every ridge and hollow, and found no sign of any cave, no strange carvings, not even the faintest trace of fire. When I asked about the wreckage, the answers came slower. The plane had never been recovered. No debris, no signal, no black box, not a single piece. The radar log showed a sudden drop in altitude, then a complete disappearance, as if the aircraft had ceased to exist mid-air. They classified it as equipment malfunction and pilot disorientation. Officially, I had been found near a frozen river, wandering on foot, confused, with no memory of the impact. That was the story written into the report. It was simpler that way, easier to believe than what I'd told them. But even then, I could tell by the way they avoided my eyes that they knew something didn't add up. My boots, which I still had when they found me, were clean, not torn, not even scuffed. The soles had no snow trapped in them, no mud, no ice. I'd supposedly been walking through the forest for days, yet my clothes weren't wet or torn. Someone, or something, had taken care of me. When they drew blood, one of the doctors asked if I'd been on any medication or taken experimental supplements. He said the chemical markers in my system were unusual, though he didn't elaborate. The next day, he wasn't on my case anymore. After discharge, they gave me a debriefing, 2 men in suits, not rescue personnel, not local authorities. They didn't introduce themselves. They just asked the same questions in different ways. Where had I gone after the crash? How long had I been underground? What did I see? When I told them again about the figures, about how they moved, one of them leaned forward slightly and said, "You believe they were alive?" The phrasing stuck with me. You believe. Not were they, but you believe. As if my belief was the only thing that mattered. When I finished, they thanked me for my cooperation and told me to rest. I never saw them again. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the investigation board. Case closed. Cause undetermined. They included a copy of the final report for my records. At the bottom of the last page, there was a single handwritten note in red ink. No geological anomaly confirmed. But I couldn't stop thinking about the hum, the low frequency that had filled the air beneath the mountain. I'd felt it again once since then, faint but undeniable, when I stood near the Cascades on the anniversary of the crash. The earth had shivered beneath my feet just once, as though something below had recognized me. Several months passed before anything out of the ordinary happened again. I had started convincing myself that the whole thing had been the result of trauma, a trick of the mind pieced together from fear and exhaustion. The doctors, the investigators, even my own family had done their best to help me forget. Endless reassurances that it was over, that sometimes the brain fills in the blanks when reality breaks apart. For a while, I almost believed them. I found a small apartment near the edge of town, far from the flight base, and tried to rebuild a normal rhythm. I kept the blinds closed most nights because, for some reason, the dark outside still made the walls feel too thin. The only thing I couldn't let go of was the badge they'd found with me. I kept it in a drawer beside the bed, charred edges and all, as a reminder of what I still couldn't explain. Then, one morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, no stamp, no name, just my initials written in thin black ink across the front. I stood there for a minute, debating whether to open it. The paper felt cold, almost damp, as if it had been outside for hours. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white, grainy, the kind of film stock used decades ago. At first glance, it looked like nothing, just trees, a clearing, and mist. But the longer I stared, the more my stomach turned. I knew that place. The slope of the hill, the curve of the tree line, even the way the fog pooled at the base. It was the exact same clearing where my plane had gone down. Only this photo wasn't from before the crash. It was taken after. In the center of the clearing, where the snow had once been smooth and untouched, there was now a structure, scaffolding, sheets of tarp. and a large dark opening in the ground. It wasn't a crater, it was too clean, too perfectly circular. A man-made excavation, lit by portable floodlights. Several figures in heavy coats stood near the edge, their faces blurred, but their posture unmistakable. They were working, not searching. My heart started pounding as I flipped the photo over. There was a single handwritten line on the back, written in the same thin, deliberate penmanship as the envelope. March 12, 1994. That date wouldn't have meant much to anyone else, but I knew it immediately. 2 weeks after the day they claimed they found me wandering near the river. 2 weeks after, they told me there was nothing there. No caves, no tunnels, no signs of disturbance. Yet here was proof, not of a myth, not of some hallucination, but of an organized operation. Someone had gone back after me. Someone had dug into that mountain, into whatever lay beneath it, and they hadn't wanted me to know. I called every contact I still had from the service. Old unit numbers, former colleagues, even the base operator at Fairchild. Most of the lines were disconnected. A few rang endlessly without answer. One picked up. An unfamiliar voice that stayed silent for a full 10 seconds before hanging up. When I tried again, the number was already out of service. I checked the envelope for prints, watermarks, anything that could tell me where it came from. Nothing. Not even the faint chemical scent of processed paper, just the lingering earthy smell of damp soil, like it had been kept somewhere underground. That night I spread the photo across my desk and stared at it until my eyes ached. The more I looked, the more details surfaced that I hadn't noticed before. There were cables running into the pit, a set of floodlights positioned at perfect intervals, forming a perimeter, and in one corner, near the edge of the image, a faint blur that didn't look like any of the workers. It was taller, broader, standing farther back from the others. The camera must have caught it mid-motion, because its outline was soft, distorted, but even through the noise and damage of the film, I could see the faint reflection of light in what could only be eyes. For the first time since the crash, I realized that whatever had happened in those woods hadn't ended with my rescue. It had only paused. Someone had gone back to that place, not to recover wreckage, but to recover them. The cave, the hum, the creatures. It wasn't an accident that I had been taken. It was a message. And now, months later, someone was making sure I knew the message wasn't finished. It's been 30 years since that night over the Cascades, and still not a day passes without me hearing echoes of it somewhere in the back of my mind. Time has a strange way of eroding the edges of memory, softening the impossible until it starts to feel like a story someone else lived, but not this one. The official report still sits in a government archive somewhere, stamped and signed, pilot disorientation under adverse weather conditions. That's how they explain everything they can't control. Give it a label, file it away, bury it under paperwork thick enough to smother the truth. On paper, my plane went down because I lost focus, because I panicked in a storm. But that's not what happened. That's never what happened. Even now, I can still see them when I close my eyes. Not as monsters, not as some nightmare created by the brain to fill in the blanks, but as something far older. They weren't chaotic or wild. Every movement they made carried intent, as though they lived by a rhythm the rest of us had forgotten. They weren't creatures of instinct. They were keepers. I don't know of what, but I felt it. That calm authority in the way they moved, the patience in the way they watched. The world above calls them myths, folklore, shadows caught in fog, but I've stood before them. I've felt their presence. They don't want to destroy. They want to remain unseen. Hidden not out of fear, but preservation. And in some deep, impossible way, I think they succeeded. Every winter, when the first storms roll over the Cascades and the wind cuts through the trees, I still hear it. That same low hum that once shook the walls of the cave. It rises with the gusts and fades when the air goes still, vibrating somewhere below hearing, below thought. It doesn't frighten me anymore. It never really did. It's not a warning. It's not even a call. It feels more like a heartbeat, slow, patient, waiting, as though something buried beneath the mountains still breathes, listening for the next time the wind carries my name through the pines. I kept that belief to myself for decades. The story became more a silence than a secret, something I carried quietly because saying it aloud made it sound small, ridiculous, fragile. But last month everything shifted again. An old colleague, one of the few who still remembered the case, sent me a message out of nowhere. No greeting, no explanation, just a single attachment labeled Field Recording, Mount Rainier, February 2, 2024. I almost didn't open it. Curiosity won. The audio starts simple enough. Snow crunching under boots, wind across a microphone, the muffled laughter of hikers. Ordinary, harmless. Then the tone changes. A sound rises beneath the wind, deep and layered, too heavy to be natural. It's the same vibration that used to roll through the cave, the same one that made my bones hum all those years ago. The microphone catches it faintly at first, like an echo from underground, but then it strengthens, clear and deliberate, shaking the air in slow, steady intervals. It isn't thunder. It isn't machinery. It's the hum, the same frequency that the analysts once swore didn't exist, and then, beneath it, something else. It's faint, buried deep under the vibration, but you can hear it if you slow the recording down. A voice, human or close enough to pass for one, distorted by distance, layered with static but still clear, just 5 words. Stay where you are. The exact phrase I heard through the radio that night before everything changed. I don't know who recorded it. I don't know how far up the mountain they were, but I know this much. Whatever was beneath that forest isn't gone. It never was. The sound isn't calling for help, and it's not sending a threat. It's doing the same thing it's always done. Waiting. Sometimes, when I play that clip back, I can almost hear something moving behind it. Faint breathing, soft steps. A rhythm that feels alive. And when I turn the volume up high enough, when the hum settles just under my pulse, I start to think that maybe they never meant to trap me at all. Maybe that night wasn't an accident, but an invitation, a test. A way of saying that some parts of this world aren't meant to be flown over. They're meant to be remembered. And if you ever find yourself near Mount Rainier, standing alone as the wind pushes through the trees, listen closely. If you hear the earth tremble, if the air seems to breathe, if the hum begins to build beneath your feet, don't move, don't call out, just wait, because something might be listening. And it's been waiting a very long time.